Hello everyone and welcome to a very nice game from yesterday's Sinquefield Cup. It is the most exciting game. Young of Duda challenges world champion Gukesh So far they haven't played all that much classical chess. They played only 2 games. Both of them ended with a draw. But this one, yeah, if you're prone to vertigo or you have a weak heart, maybe skipping this game would be for the best altogether because it's not easy to follow, and that is an understatement. So let's dive straight into it as we have quite a lot to cover. Young Shistov with white opens with pawn to d4. We have pawn to d5 by Gukesh, c4, pawn to e6, and knight f3. We have knight to f6, so the standard queen's gambit declined. Knight to c3, and there are many possible ways you can continue this, like bishop to e7, pawn to c6, bishop to b4, and the fourth most popular, knight b to d7, the barman variation. Which is what Gukesh goes for. It was some 1905, and this variation was tried in a tournament in Barmen in Germany, and that's why it's called the Barmen variation. We have pawn to e3, pawn to a6, we have pawn to b3, and pawn to b6. And usually here, as it's played quite a lot, you just continue by developing your bishops either by fianchettoing the dark square bishop or going bishop to d3. But here Duda throws in an exchange on d5. C captures on d5, e captures, we have bishop to b2, and bishop to b7. Okay, pawn to g3, bishop to d6, bishop to g2, and there is a game in the database. Rafael Vagania played it against Rainer Buchmann in 2004, so 21 years ago, where castle's king side was played, and white won a very nice game. But here Gukesh goes for queen to e7. It is the top move recommended by the engine, and it is now as of move 10 that we have a completely new game. And it's a very weird move to see because now you're thinking, is Gukesh castling kingside? Is Gukesh castling queenside? Is he about to leave his king in the center of the board? So it is very tricky. And, as Yasser Serevan always says, you don't want to give your opponent your home address too early on in the game. So, okay, pawn to a4. Duda says, okay, if you castle queenside, for example, I can strike with a5. If you play pawn to b5, I can put pressure on the b5 pawn, maybe sacrifice the knight, push the a pawn. So, might not be a bad game. But Gukesh doesn't castle queenside or kingside. He goes pawn to h5. Says, no, you castle kingside. Maybe I will attack on the king side, and maybe I won't. Okay, Duda plays queen to c1, sort of x-rays that c7 pawn, and Gukesh goes knight e4. Knight captures on e4, we have d captures on e4, knight to d2, and just pawn to h4, saying, okay, my c7 pawn is defended, I can just continue attacking here. Bishop to a3, offering a trade of bishops, and queen to e6 by Gukesh. You could also capture on a3 and then go queen to e6, but probably Gukesh was waiting for castles to go h3, and then if bishop h1, just castle kingside, and then this light square bishop is just a terrible piece, whereas you can do whatever you want with this light square bishop. You can play a6, bishop a6, or you can go somewhere like c8, then to g4, then to f3. So not a bad position for black. But Duda captures on d6 first. We have c captures and queen to a3, followed by Gukesh's knight to f6. And it's interesting that Gukesh doesn't go for pawn to h3 with, let's say, bishop f1 and castles. It's hard to say what he disliked about this position. If you go bishop to c4, you can even play pawn to d5. And again, the bishop can either go to a6 or, again, be shifted over to g4 if needed. So this is, borderline winning for black. So after queen to a3, okay, Gukesh goes knight to f6. We have knight to c4, now putting pressure on that b6 pawn. And Gukesh says you can have it, rook to d8. Now, the question is, should young Shistov capture on b6? The answer is yes. This is by far the best move, and there's no reason not to do it. If your opponent is not threatening anything, you should grab a pawn. And Gukesh goes pawn to a5, now freeing up the a6 square for the bishop, so chances are you should castle here. But there's also a problem. If you just castle here, then you run into d5. your knight on b6 is being threatened, and how do you defend it? d5 now also controls c4. If you go queen to c5, then just h3, and after bishop goes back, rook d6, and the knight is trapped. You do have some tricks here, like queen b5 check. Okay, king can come to e7, then you can pin the rook, but the king comes to d8, and now you can no longer defend the knight, and you just win a piece here. So yeah, castling, not the best idea here. Young Shishto goes for g captures on h4, and this is a very, very tricky move indeed. And now, if Gukesh tries d5, seems like it's the exact same thing. Young Shishto had something very devious in mind. He would play queen c5, and after rook d6, play bishop h3. And he would take away, well, all the light squares from the black queen. If you capture, then you lose the rook. And if queen to e7, then just rook c1. And now it's white who's attacking. So after g captures on h4, best for Gukesh would be to go bishop to a6, cut off the white king from castling, and then if, let's say, pawn to b4, you put the bishop on d3. And okay, white does get a passed pawn, it's very strong, but now you castle, your opponent's king is in the center of the board, you have a bishop on d3. The engine says 0-0, but I mean, who really feels like this is a 0-0. But in the game, after g captures on h4, rook captures on h4 was played by Gukesh. We have rook to c1, now stopping any and all threats Gukesh might have had along the c file, and bishop to a6. Okay, Duda is no longer castling, but here comes pawn to b4, and again, everyone thought Gukesh would just play bishop to d3 here, but no, he plays queen to g4. And this is just... beautiful for us, the viewers, because what happens next is almost impossible to calculate. We have bishop to f1, only move for Young Shishto, and queen to f3. Now challenging the rook here, and what do you think Duda played here? So this is only the first pause the video moment. I might make it 3, might make it 4, might make it 5. I have no idea. What do you play here as white? So the only good move for white is pawn to b5, and this is what Duda played. And the reason for that is that, okay, yes, there's a rook hanging on h1, but if you capture this rook on h1, then look at this. B captures on a6, and what's black threatening? This pawn is just coming to a8, and you're going to win the rook, and that's pretty much it. If you go knight g4, okay, there is some moves that have to be included because you're threatening knight captures on h2 and queen captures on f1, but after, let's say, king d2, queen captures on h2, going for the f2 pawn, you can just play bishop e2. You don't really care. Queen captures, rook to f1, and after queen to g2, even queen b3, putting pressure on f7. And after, let's say, knight f6 defending, now you play a7, and that's it. Once you go, let's say, rook h2, threaten to capture the bishop, rook e1, that's all there is. Next move, you queen the pawn, win the rook, and you're just going to be up a full bishop. So... yeah, that's completely winning. But after b5, queen to h1 wasn't played. What should have been played is bishop to b7. Even with bishop to b7, it's still very, very hard for Gukesh to actually survive this. Because now... queen a2, which is the best move, and let's say queen captures on h1, will be met with rook c7, and this is now a huge problem. f7 is hanging, and after knight d7, which is your only way of defending, you will capture, and after queen f3, again adding a defender, you will just move the knight to b6. And okay, the bishop is hanging, you can play bishop to a8, but now knight captures on a8, rook captures, and queen to d5, and that's it. You're attacking the rook, and if rook to d8, you can just play bishop to e2, for example. Queen f6, you have to guard f7, and now bishop to c4 with a triple attack on f7, and that's it. Rook to d7 will be met with pawn to b6, rook captures on h2, and now queen captures on e4 with check. King to f8, queen to a8 with check, and now queen to d8 blocking, but now even pawn to b7. And I mean, this is just, even with half an hour on the clock, impossible to calculate. Let's say king e7, queen captures on d8, you have to capture with the king, and then just b8 queen. So... yeah, that's, you know, only 2 lines, and there are many more you could calculate here. But Gukesh doesn't go for queen captures on h1. He doesn't go for bishop to b7, which is sort of the only move that could keep him in the game. He plays knight to g4, where Duda is now completely winning, but he has to find a very, very unique set of moves. He finds queen to a2. We already discussed this move in the previous line. But now the problem is, how does Gukesh defend this? If you play pawn to d5, which seems like the only reasonable move, then you just play rook to c7. And now if rook to h6, you just play rook to g1. Okay, you didn't capture the rook, but how are you defending this? For example, rook captures on b6, but rook to g3. You attack the queen, and now the queen has to either move away from the defense of the knight or keep defending, and that will be met with bishop to h3. And that's it. You will have to move the queen, bishop captures, and okay, your bishop here is still hanging. Let's say you play bishop b7, rook h3, threatening mate in 1, and if you defend, then just queen to a3, threatening rook to h8 check. You sacrifice the rook, and then you checkmate on e7. That's all there is to it. So after queen to a2, Gukesh did not find pawn to d5. He played queen captures on h1, even though none of those moves actually work. Now rook to c7. Okay, it's the first move that comes to mind. We're threatening mate in 1, so that's not difficult to calculate. Queen to f3, defending against mate, and this is the problem. So first brilliant move found for Duda, second brilliant move found for Duda. It is time to find the third brilliant move, but this one seems to be the most elusive one. Try to solve this incredibly difficult position, possibly the most, among the top 10 that I've ever given on the channel. So do your best. Well, I give you a couple of seconds. The only move that wins for Duda is not bishop captures on a6, and it's the move he played. The only winning move for Duda is actually bishop to g2, and for a reason that is, it can only be seen, it cannot be explained. Point is that the queen has to keep an eye on the f7 pawn, so okay, that goes without saying. But it goes much deeper than that. After you move the queen, let's say queen to f6, now the key is to capture the bishop on a6, and black, sorry about that, and black has no moves, because rook captures on h2 now. You just play queen c2, and you don't care. There's nothing can capture on f2 because the queen is defending that, and the bishop is in between the rook and the f2 pawn. And that's the beauty of the bishop to g2 move. And there's nothing you can do here. If you capture the bishop, then just queen captures on e4 check, and you lose that rook. And that's the all there is to it. But yeah, very difficult to find. Even with 9 minutes on the clock, Duda played b captures on a6, and now Gukesh is back in the game. He plays rook captures on h2, and now you're just not in time for bishop to g2 because, well, the g2 square is nicely defended. So there's only one move that keeps Gukesh in the game. So can you find this one? Sometimes it's easier to find attacking moves than defensive ones, but can you find the only move that holds for Gukesh? It is, of course, queen to e2, because the knight captures on e3 is a very serious threat, and queen to e2 is the only one that solves it. We have rook captures on f2, queen captures on f3, we have e captures on f3, and now pawn to a7, followed by rook to b2. And again, you might think, okay, we're still fighting, we might still win this. Well, no, there's only one move that does not lose this position for Gukesh. So again, what do you play here? You have 10 seconds. The only move, knight c8, it is what was played, but just to give you an example, if you queen the pawn, sorry, I meant for Duda, the only move that doesn't lose for Duda. If you play a8 queen, then comes pawn to f2 check, king d1, you trade on a8, captures, and now rook b1 check, king e2 to defend the bishop, now rook e1 check, king f3, and rook captures on f1. And you cannot capture the knight because just rook g1 check, and you queen the pawn. So you have to play rook c8 check, king d7, rook to c7 check, hoping for a repetition, but okay, king to d8, and now rook c2 will be met with rook to b1. And now that's all there is. You have to give up the rook. Rook captures, knight captures, king captures, and of course, rook to b8 traps the knight, and yeah, you just finish the entire line being up a full rook. So after rook to b2, knight c8, the only move that does not lose for Duda, and now knight captures on e3. Again, only move that doesn't lose for Gukesh. So it's a very unique territory where you have to play only moves just for it to be a draw, otherwise you lose terribly. And now knight captures on d6. Of course, now if a8 queen, it seems like you can promote, but f2 is checkmate. Look at this. Absolutely disgusting. So after knight captures on e3, knight captures on d6 check was played, king to f8, and now rook captures on f7 check, finally connecting with that f3 pawn. King g8, rook captures on f3, and knight captures on f1. King captures on f1, and rook to a8. Of course, you cannot enjoy a juicy knight here, as the pawn promotes with check. So rook to a8, going after the pawn, and rook to f7, nicely defending. So this is still very much a difficult game. Rook to b4, we have rook to c7 and king to h7. You don't want to allow a check and then a promotion. So king to h7, knight to c8. Now you are threatening knight. If the rook moves, of course, captures any of the pawns, then you're just going to go knight b6 and force rook captures on a7. And there's really nothing better here for Gukesh. Rook captures on d4, knight b6. We have rook to f8 with check, king to e2, and now rook to e8 with check. King f3, rook to d3 with check, king f2, rook d2 check, king f3, rook to d3 check, king f2, rook to d2 check, king f3, and after rook to d3 check, it was in this position on move 45 that Gukesh and young Krzysztof agreed to a draw, as there is nothing more to be done here, or rather it was a draw by threefold repetition. So the problem is if you try to go up the board, and it seems like you can do this because after rook d4 check, king f5, there's no rook d5 check, and you're just going to promote the pawn. Hello, king h6. And again, now you have to go rook c6 check, move the rook, and just force the king back, because if you insist on bringing the queen into the game, then g6 check, king f6, and rook to f4 will be checkmate. So yeah, a game seemingly impossible to calculate, and it was for young Krzysztof, because he was winning had he found that bishop to g2 move. But yeah, obviously too difficult to find. But everything else, I mean, it was so difficult to calculate just to keep it in territory of equality. They were able to do it, and in the end, one could say a fair result. So yeah, you might think, okay, two of them so far only played 2 classical games. They were a draw. You'd probably think like, okay, snooze fest. But yeah, seeing this one, not every draw is a snooze fest. This was the most exciting game of the round, and quite possibly the event so far. But yeah, beautiful stuff here by young Krzysztof and Gukesh. All of the games of round 5 were a draw, so there is no change in the standings, and we'll see what happens in round 6. Today is a rest day, so we're gonna enjoy it. And if you guys have any suggestions, also use that hashtag suggestion. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Gerhard Henkelman, Derek King, Hernan Escalante Jr., Robert Kiefer, and Edmund Freeman for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.